Welcome, everyone. My name is Graham Bullock, and I am a professor of political science at Davidson College and the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, or DCI for short.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie McNabo, a junior anthropology and political science double major here at Davidson, and I'm one of I'm in this year's cohort of Deliberative Citizenship Fellows, and I'm also one of the DCI's 2 student co-conveners. Say that 5 times fast.
And before we get started, we encourage you to switch over to speaker view in Zoom, as we will be spotlighting the speakers, and it'll be easier for you to see who's talking in that view. So just go up to view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and select speaker view. And so now that hopefully you can see us, Katie and myself, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight for the DCI's 4th Deliberative Forum of the year, following our events on voting and elections, the future of democracy, and reforming the Supreme Court.
We are happy to be co-hosting this event with Davidson College's Center for Civic Engagement, as well as the North Mecklenburg Economic Mobility Collaborative. We really appreciate these organizations' help in getting the word out about this event.
So before we begin, we'd like to share a little bit about the DCI. Its purpose is to create opportunities for Davidson students, faculty, staff, alumni, and members of the wider community to productively engage with one another on difficult and contentious issues facing our community and society.
And as you read about in the conversation guide for tonight's event, housing is definitely one of those issues, as different stakeholders have a wide range of needs, goals, and solutions related to housing.
So to help us better understand these diverse perspectives, we've paired a deliberative forum with an amazing panel of academic, community, government, and nonprofit experts this evening. In a moment, my colleague, Stacy Reamer, Director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Associate Dean of Student Life, will introduce our panelists.
Tonight, we'll first go through 4 quick rounds of questions that will enable each of our panelists to share some of their insights on housing in our region. Then we'll move to a more free-flowing conversation in which panelists will be able to respond to one another and share additional perspectives with us.
Katie and I will co-moderate that conversation. And I just like to note Katie's engagement with this issue. With support from Claire McGee, our DCI coordinator, and myself, Katie has really spearheaded the development of the deliberation guide that we shared with all of you, and has really done a deep dive on the complex housing issues in Davidson, Cornelius, and the broader Charlotte-Mecklenburg region.
Speaking of the deliberation guide, which I've really enjoyed working on, after the panel discussion, all of you guys will have a chance to talk about these issues and to listen to one another's perspectives on them in small groups moderated by facilitators trained and certified by the DCI. This will in some ways be a unique opportunity for you to engage with one another and practice the art of deliberative citizenship. And we really hope and believe that you'll find it to be a rewarding experience.
So along these lines, please complete the consent form and short survey that has been copied into the chat, and the one that your facilitators will share with you at the end of the forum. These surveys are part of the research component of the DCI and will help us improve the design of our events in the future. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the mic over to Stacy to introduce our amazing panelists.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie and Graham, and good evening, everyone. We're excited to have with us an incredible group of panelists who've been so generous with their time and expertise. Our first panelist is Eugene Bradley, who joined the town of Davidson in October of 2020 to serve as Housing and Equity Director. In this position, Eugene leads the town's affordable housing and racial equity programs, in addition to working with individuals who wish to rent or purchase affordable homes, organizations that support affordable housing, and developers who build affordable housing. Eugene has over 16 years of public sector planning and implementation experience in the fields of neighborhood revitalization, community development, placemaking, and land use planning. Our second panelist is Liz Clayson-Kelly. She is CEO of Roof Above, which offers a spectrum of homeless services and housing programs. And it's the new name of the merged Men's Shelter of Charlotte and Urban Ministry Center. Liz has 2 decades of experience working on issues related to homelessness and housing, having previously served as the executive director of the Men's Shelter of Charlotte and an associate executive director of the Urban Ministry Center. Liz is a graduate of Davidson College and holds her master's of public policy from Duke University. Our next panelist is Elizabeth Demel, an associate professor of geography at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Her primary research interests lie within urban and neighborhood dynamics and urban transportation. Her scholarship has sought to understand how and why a range of different factors related to quality of life and socioeconomic trends influence how neighborhoods change. Professor Demel is also involved in research projects that examine the social and economic consequences of new public rail transit investments. Our next panelist is Willie Jones, an affordable housing and community development professional. Willie is primarily focused on the intersections of faith, community economic development, and affordable housing. He's the board president of Zachariah Alexander CDC, affiliated with St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church. He also serves on the board of directors of Crossroads Corporation for Affordable Housing and Community Development, Smithville Community Coalition, and as a consultant to the Greer Heights Economic Foundation. And our 5th panelist is John Sanders, senior analyst in regulatory studies and research editor at the John Locke Foundation in Raleigh, North Carolina. An economist by training, John studies state regulations and several policy areas, including energy and electricity policy, overregulation, occupational licensing, poverty and opportunity, and emerging ideas in economic growth. A graduate of North Carolina State University, John has also researched issues in higher education for the John William Pope Center for Higher Education and has taught economics as an adjunct instructor. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
And as I think it was very abundant by those introductions by Stacy, we have an incredible group of panelists, and we're really excited to get started with our first question. So our first question is, what about housing is important to you personally, and what do you see as important for our broader community? Eugene, if you wouldn't mind to go first.
Oh, sure, great. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. To answer your question specifically, what does it mean to me personally? I really look at it as in the sense of where you connect with family. It's kind of your first introduction to the world is home, where you live. And this is where community is essentially cultivated. And so this is where it all starts. And I think where that starts is important to someone's trajectory throughout life. And be able to make that a place of remembrance and good feelings is important. So for me, I think that is kind of the essence of why housing is important to me personally, but also to the community.
Absolutely. Next, we have Liz.
Well, I'll echo what Eugene shared. So I think housing is just foundational and fundamental to so many important aspects of humanity: safety, stability, opportunity. I experienced that in my own life, but I think about folks that we've served who were experiencing homelessness and then got housed. I think about people who had cancer and got to get treatment once they were housed. I think about people, one man we served, he moved in and he got a phone number and he connected with his daughter he had never met. So all of the possibilities that happen once that base foundation is met.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, you're next.
Sure, thank you. So in addition to being an urban geographer, I'm also a resident here in Davidson. I've lived here for 13 years with my husband, and I'm now raising my 2 children here. And so as a parent, there's a couple things about housing, and particularly related to Davidson, that are really important to me at my core. So there's things I love about this town. I love the sense of community. I love the opportunity to spend Friday afternoons at Summit outside, enjoying some time with friends. And last Friday was one of these beautiful Fridays, and the construction was there, but the tables were packed and the trees were blooming. And I kind of looked around and I saw a small flag hanging outside, and it said, "Black Lives Matter." And then I peered around at the crowd and I thought, if Black Lives mattered so much to this community, why is there not a single one in this crowd? And so that's where my love of this town of Davidson kind of conflicts with my desire to raise my kids in a multicultural and multiracial community. So these trends have not happened by accident. They've happened because of some housing policies and decisions that have made it kind of an exclusive and unaffordable community.
Absolutely. I was also there on last Friday. So I'm unfortunately don't believe I saw you, but I would agree with you on the weather note. Willie, you're next.
Yes, quality housing in a safe neighborhoods is a critical element to achieving one's potential. It's also a foundational element to achieving racial equity. And we can see the impact of years of and decades of disinvestment, particularly in cities where schools and a series of public services are kind of allocated based on revenue from particular districts. So I think the whole question then is you can be poor in poor housing environment that generates less tax revenue, and you'll end up with a trajectory that's dramatically different than others.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, John.
Well, I think about it from kind of the perspective of the American dream, which is, home ownership. And, this isn't just about home ownership, but housing is a way to build communities, is your first step to putting down roots. So getting into a community where you're going to live and work and have a family. So I'm excited about it. It's one of the research topics that I picked up is because I look at it as a way also to spotlight new ideas and exciting ways for helping people help themselves and help their communities.
Thanks everyone for those wonderful introductory remarks. Our next question is, what issues do you see regarding housing in your community as most important and or most pressing? And I think we'll go in the same order, starting with Eugene.
Well, we have several issues, but I'll just kind of talk about maybe one or two. But I think the obvious is we just don't simply have enough to accommodate residents that are currently in Davidson or want to live in Davidson. And so I think that's something that we are actively working on. Since my coming to the town, we are really heading forward in that direction. We're excited about kind of what opportunities lie ahead. But I think that it's plain and simple. We just don't have enough. And we don't have the diversity that we would like to see now, but we want to be able to create a community where we have a lot of different options. But also top with that, the second one will be gentrification. I mean, how do we combat that? That's another large issue of how we kind of unpack that. There's a lot of kind of layers within that, but I think that's something that we want to be able to address in the future.
Great, thanks Eugene. And Liz?
Yeah, so I'm going to echo Eugene again on the quantity issue. So there are about 3,400 people experiencing homelessness in Mecklenburg County. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that, we've got thousands of people who are in housing but paying more than 30% of their income. And so you fundamentally have this disalignment between what people's incomes are and what housing costs. And so part of also one of the most pressing issues for me these days is we have all of these older apartments that have been renting for $750, $800 a month, and they're so vulnerable now either to be renovated and the rents go up or to be torn down and replaced with luxury products. So this mass exodus of the older product is really driving a lot of our housing insecurity these days.
Great, thank you, Liz. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I have to agree. The affordability issue is front and central. So our supply of housing has not kept up with demand. So of course, prices have risen. And as a result, lower income workers cannot afford home ownership. And then they're missing out on a key piece of equity and wealth building that higher income earners enjoy. So we widen this gap and disparity. And then for me as a geographer, another important issue that I'm kind of grappling with is we talk a lot about gentrification, but disinvestment in older suburban neighborhoods is also really important and doesn't get talked about as much. So poverty rates are much less concentrated than they used to be in the city center. So when poverty is dispersed, it's really hard to provide transportation options when you have poorly connected streets and you've got precariously built housing and you have amenity or opportunity desert. So we need creative solutions for those places that are sort of left behind.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. And Willie?
Yeah, I'll probably zero in more on the work I do in Smithville. Smithville, like many historical Black neighborhoods, is part of what I would call the vanishing Black space. That is, there were many places that only existed where Blacks could only stay because of segregation. And now those places are being, they're under attack and at risk of not just gentrification, but completely displacing the existing population. And that's been a trend that's happened in most of the major cities. So that bothers me because it happens just about everywhere. And then B, gentrification tends to be slower at first, and people don't realize it's happening until it reaches a turning point or it reaches a critical mass, and you start seeing larger scale displacement. So within Black neighborhoods, people don't necessarily fear that there's gentrification until when they see it, it's like on top of them and virtually impossible to slow down. So I think those are the two things that I worry most as it relates to communities, urban communities, and particularly communities of color.
Okay, great. Thank you, Willie. And again, John.
I'm not going to surprise anyone, but yeah, I agree with the panelists about the issue of supply. This is a very popular state. We're under great high demand, and of course, the amount of land that's available to develop on is not changing. So we need new and fresh thinking on how to get more supplies of dwelling availability to people. So that's my focus.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, John. It's actually a really good leeway into our next question. Given the current state of housing in Mecklenburg County, what should our collective goals and vision be for housing in the region? And Eugene, you're up again.
You're on mute, Eugene.
Sorry about that. But what I was saying, I think there's a kind of a lot of layers within this. I think starting with education is key of really educating the public of what affordable housing is and who it's for and why it's designed the way it is. I think starting there is a good stepping point to help people understand what this issue is. You really have to fight against the NIMBYism of kind of our day of not in my backyard, and you see it as a negative thing. So I think we have to start there. But then obviously we have to move to funding. And with rising costs, land costs, it just makes housing across the board just more expensive. And how do we kind of get creative of partnering with not-for-profits, the private sector, the public sector, obviously, to get to a goal where we're satisfied that we're accommodating our residents at the end of the day. And so, and then the third piece is really, how do we build better neighborhoods? I think Elizabeth had talked about kind of that suburban type of community aging out in the sense of kind of its durability. And how do we kind of reimagine some of those spaces, and how do we make better connections to those spaces as we kind of move through this continuum, and really be smart about how we, for one, build new neighborhoods, but also how do we help adjust to the old ones that need some help.
Absolutely. Liz, you're next.
Yeah, so most of my life's work has been with individuals, and so I look at this at an individual lens. And so I've been helping connect people to housing for 20 years, and in the last particularly 3 to 4 years, it is just so difficult to find space and places for people to go. And when I step back, I think, gosh, what is our community saying? That we know these are our neighbors. We know these lives exist. The data is there. We understand what people's income is. We know that housing's fundamental. And we are not making space and room for people to live in our community. And what does that really say about us? And so I look at it from that lens to say, how do we make room for who we are and for all members of our community?
Absolutely. Elizabeth, you're next.
Sure. So if I had to pick one goal, I guess it would be to reduce inequality across the metropolitan area. But we also need to recognize that inequality is multifaceted. So we can't just think of housing as a solution in itself without also recognizing that people need to work. And they need a variety of job options. They need transportation. They need quality schools, daycares, affordable food. So all of these are intertwined issues. So we shouldn't have to make a trade-off between living in a diverse community or one with ample opportunities that are very livable. And for that to happen, we need to level out the disparities. We need to invest in areas that have been neglected. And we then need to ensure that those newly invested in areas, the people can stay, that they are not then priced out and displaced.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good point. Willie?
Yeah, 2 points here. I think first off, Charlotte Metro really lags behind other areas of the country who have made a lot more progress on this. There's still a kind of a culture here of if you push developers, it's like killing the goose that laid the golden egg. And as a result, people tolerate things here that in terms of lack of affordability, lack of pressure from municipal governments, they tolerate that here in a way that isn't tolerated, particularly like Portland or Seattle or Boston or Chicago, et cetera, is the first point that you really have to have. This has to be policy driven, and you've got to figure out a solution to the fact that the largest group of contributors to campaigns are real estate developers. So you got to grapple with that. The second one is I think the city of Charlotte did a good thing with its latest strategic plan for 2040. But I also think that we've got to be a heck of a lot bolder than that. We're not going to solve this. We're not going to solve this problem just on the back of being able to put additional units here and there. I think you have to rethink the whole philosophy behind housing. And I think that until we're willing to do that, we're not going to be able to get at new forms of housing and how you create more quality density in ways that enhance the quality of life.
Like John?
I would focus on getting rid of government obstacles to supply. There are so many different things that kind of stand in the way. Excessive zoning regulations, permitting that takes forever, or having to go through different ways, different offices to get permits, land use regulations, setbacks, land use rules. There's so many ways that are preventing people from even making the most use of their own property to bring about more supply in that way. Laws that prevent ADUs or granny flats or converting garages or converting homes into duplexes or triplexes. So that's where my focus is on.
Great. So John, again, another great segue to our last question, beginning to think about solutions. So how might we best achieve these goals? What criteria do you think are most important when evaluating possible housing solutions? So again, we'll start with Eugene. You're on mute again, sorry.
I apologize for that. I think you got to kind of think about it being strategic in how you approach the topic of kind of, there's a lot of layers to it. But as far as kind of the education piece, I think you need to have a campaign to educate folks first, but also maybe to have commitment, a shared kind of load of everyone. You have to think about how we fund this. There's a cost to everything, and affordable housing is one of those things. So how do you look at your tax base and use those public dollars to get to the goal that you want? But also, how do you create partnerships that maybe not exist before between the public and the private sector? So really kind of mapping that out and understanding kind of how that can work. to John's point, you do have a lot of red tape in the middle of all this. And so when you're able to bring partners to the table and other ideas, I think you're able to get past those humps that are generally created through bureaucracy, quite honestly. And so I think the partnerships are going to play a key role in that.
Okay, thanks so much. Liz.
Yeah, I think we need to be honest about what's working and what's not working, and we need to look at data. Many of our affordable housing tools, like the low income housing tax credit, aren't really effective anymore. We gear a lot of the conversation towards folks that aren't the greatest needs in terms of affordable housing. So I think we got to be honest on that. I think we have to allow the market to carry all the market can, to John's point, with some, some minimal interactions. Could we get the market to create greater affordability? So then we can really target public resources and philanthropic resources to where the greatest need is, and where, the market's not really ever going to create something for someone who gets a retirement check of $800 a month. We're going to have significant intervention. But the market can do something at $850 a month, right? So how do we help be as efficient and effective as possible with our resources?
Okay, thanks for that, Liz. And Elizabeth.
Okay, well, so on the one hand, the solution is pretty straightforward. We just need to build more houses. And so this, one of the most efficient ways to do this in a way that doesn't contribute to more suburban sprawl, so people don't have to drive crazy amounts, is through this dense infill development. And that's when the solution becomes a little less straightforward, because that tends to invoke a little bit of fear. And so when I've talked to people, I've heard all kinds of fears. People have told me that if we build a train from Davidson to Charlotte, my TV will be stolen, that trains cause crime, that multifamily or affordable housing causes crime, or property values to decrease. So I think we need to communicate the fact that buildings and roads and infrastructure, they don't cause social problems. These problems are largely a result of our unequal societies and unequal cities. So if we could, again, make one of our goals to level out this playing field and stop resisting changes, then we'll come a long way in overcoming some of those obstacles.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. And Willie.
I've kind of been doing this for 35 years, and I have never seen the market produce any affordability for scale, period, end of sentence. Okay, you can have some low income housing tax credit, but then the benefits are really driven by investors. So it's not as if investment is why they do it, as opposed to the housing. But other than that, in terms of single family homes, et cetera, the market, particularly with the cost of land, market just doesn't get there. So I think part of our dilemma is twofold. I think there, like Liz's constituency needs direct funding and some form of subsidy, because you have a large percentage of people who are very low income. But I think beyond that, we've got to create some examples to demystify density. We've got to demystify what you can and can't do with the tax code. And I think that we have to create some significant forms of incentives, like municipal grants to jumpstart ADUs, property tax incentives to legalize middle housing like duplexes through sixplexes, townhouses, cottage clusters, et cetera. And then some form of real estate tax rebates when certain levels of density, when you reach certain levels of density. So I think you have to be creative enough to generate value. But at the same time, I've gotten even more pessimistic in my retirement about what the market will do, because I've seen the market, in fact, particularly with the advent of investor-driven developments, you start off with a 20% rate of return, unlevered, no less, rate of return as a requirement. You're just eating through the capital you could contribute to affordability.
Okay, yeah, thanks for a lot in there, a lot maybe we can come back to in our a more open conversation. But to wrap up this section, our 4 questions, go to our anchor, John.
I like what Willie said. We definitely need some creativity in this zone. We as a society have been kind of going in a rut, going down the same path on certain things, and we certainly need new ideas and fresh ideas, and some creativity. From my perspective, is from the free market perspective of allowing individual property owners, rather than a collective mentality, freedom to come up using their own creative genius of ways that they can use their own property. But there are many other ways of doing this. And one of the things that I've seen is an idea of development dividends that I'm hoping that maybe I can talk a little bit later on when we have more time to discuss.
I am on mute. College students do it too, ladies and gentlemen. We forget that we're on mute as well. But that was actually a perfect transition. So thank you again for that, John. We are going to move into our next section. Dr. Bullock, Graham, and I will co-moderate as well. And so, Graham, do you want to ask our first question?
Professors do it too. So we're all still getting used to this environment. So I guess I want to ask a kind of specific question, and part of I feel our role a little bit is to represent perspectives that aren't necessarily on the panel or in the room. And it relates to a kind of current event. So yesterday, the CDC moratorium on evictions was extended to June. This is great for many renters struggling to pay their rent, but may create greater challenges for landlords who depend on rental income for their livelihoods. Bob Pinnegar, president and CEO of the National Apartment Association, has said that these moratoriums push landlords to, quote, the brink of financial ruin, unquote. So how do you suggest we manage this apparent trade-off between the needs of renters and landlords?
And with this section, any of you guys, I'm not going to call on Eugene first. Willie, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I've worked with large and small landowners. I think one of the deficiencies in the moratorium is that people didn't figure out how to get out the moratorium before you got into moratorium. And so as a consequence, small landlords, particularly those who do self-management, who don't have a management fee to draw on, small landlords are right up against the edge in terms of their ability to make debt service on the loans, on the properties that they have. So I think the thing that has to happen is you got to structure some form of hold harmless, particularly the small landlords, and whether that's in the form of within this latest bill, I was a little disappointed that they didn't address some forms of relief for landlords, but you've got to, these are not well capitalized people. And it's a large part of the affordable housing stock in a lot of places, smaller landlords. So you've got to find some way of either restructuring the loan that holds them harmless or providing some interest subsidy as a grant source. Or you can do some things like agree to write down the interest rate that's on the commercial loan in order to give them some relief. But I think short of some form of public intervention, I don't see a mechanism to solve it, particularly for the small landlords. I talked to a couple of property managers who do tax credit properties, and interesting enough, they were not burned as badly as I thought they would have been. And that's primarily because they had some people who are on workout agreements and other people who had enough work to continue paying the rent for the most part. So, but the big hit was on the smaller, particularly family businesses that own probably less than 100 units.
Eugene?
I think I would just like to add something to that. I think Willie's is absolutely correct. And this is not maybe just for the short term, but long term. It's really being able to educate those landlords, the small ones, the landlords that may not be the most business savvy or understand kind of how what tools are available to them. So really focusing on how you educate that group and give them resources that they need to become better landlords at the end of the day. I think we need to spend some effort there. A lot of times they kind of get pushed to the side. We got to focus on the renter, but we kind of forget about the landlords and understand that it is a business for them. And how do we help support them and how to run a good business?
Definitely. Liz, would you like to add
Yeah,
something?
I'll just add a couple things. One is that the moratorium doesn't cover all evictions. So people in our communities are still being evicted even with the moratorium in place. And Roof Above last fall, we actually purchased an older apartment complex that's 341 units. And so most of those rents are, 750, 800. So that's the population we're serving there in the majority of the complex. And so we've really been active as owners in communicating with tenants and making sure they're aware of what rent resources are there. Because again, if even with the moratorium in place, your bill is growing. And so we have found tenants for the most part, to be really receptive for our working to engage them with resources. So it's supporting our work, but also not allowing their bills to grow. And so there are rent resources out there that have come with the COVID responses.
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
And I've got another question, but I want you all to also have a chance to respond to things that were already said, in our rounds of questions, and I'll come back with another question in a minute or two.
I think earlier, John, you had mentioned that you wanted to talk a little bit more about a couple different things. So you have the floor if you would like it.
Sure. One of the things that I've recently been reading about is something called development dividends, and what Willie said earlier brought that to mind. One of the problems with the dynamic, the political dynamic between developers and renters is that developers and NIMBYers kind of get, they are the ones that get all the attention at the town hall meetings and the discussions and the planning. Renters don't normally have the time nor the ability, or maybe even the knowledge that these things are under discussion. So there's an idea that I've seen floated out called a development dividends that tries to align these costs and benefits of new housing and new advocacy for housing by allowing potential renters, if they will show up to the town hall meetings and at the planning committees and advocate, then they can reap a reward if the project goes forward. So they're given a financial incentive basically to show up and advocate something that they would be able to rent, and there would have to be a lot of ways of preventing abuse of such a thing. But that's one of the more innovative ideas I've seen recently that tries to align the personal benefits and get around what an economist would call a public choice problem, where the people that would benefit from something, just because of the time costs involved, personal to them, that they're not available to really advocate for something.
Absolutely. I'll open it up to everybody else. Would anyone like to respond to that or respond to anything else that's been said earlier in the conversation?
If I'm allowed. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gene.
But I'll just be real quick. I'll add to John's. I think when you talk about engagement in particular, I have a lot of background in that, and he's absolutely right. The folks that are going to be affected the most tend to not be at those meetings. I think one of the good things about being in this pandemic is what we're doing right now is a Zoom. And so I think we're getting a little bit more creative how we can get public input across the board on a lot of our public projects, but even development projects. So I think we have an opportunity here to really think critically of how we get to the folks that are underrepresented in those meetings, the folks that are working two jobs, but they can't come to that public meeting. how do you engage them in a different way, but also add an incentive for them to participate. I think that is absolutely essential. So I 100% agree with John.
Yeah, I think I agree with John and Eugene. Would want to add this piece. From my experience in working in low-income neighborhoods, the traditional communication tools don't work very well. You've got your lead times have to be longer, and you've got to create partnerships with more institutions. So I would say I've done large-scale developments in major cities. If you don't, for me, you have to start with neighborhood organization and churches, because if they're not your conduits of information, you can't do it. You can't like buy enough radio time. And now that you've got Sirius and whatever else that people listen to, it's much harder to get in touch with people. So part of the problem we have is we have to educate our community partners who are then the conduits to many of the consumers. So we have to think much more expansively. And so I remember when I was having this conversation about stacked duplexes in Chicago, stacked duplexes where the one unit is on the first floor and second floor, and then the second unit is on the third and fourth floor, and you need some way of getting up to it. I took a drawing, and then I realized regular people can't read two-dimensional drawings. You've got to come with a model of something that they can get their heads around. But I think you have to rethink the whole notion of how you access people and how you educate them. And then when you want to mobilize them, you got to figure out, just like Black voter registration or getting people to the polls, you got to come up with your van, you got to go around, pick up people. You know, it's, you have to think about stuff in a very different way.
Absolutely. I will say on behalf of at least some of the young people, I couldn't tell you the last time I intentionally listened to the radio. I'm sorry if that's breaking the hearts of anyone that's a radio fan in this meeting.
But I think it's interesting to say let's be honest about why are we getting input? Because it feels like in some of our current climates that the greatest goal is let's not have tension, right? Let's not have conflict. Let's make this as smooth as possible. And why are we seeking community input? Is it for a rubber stamp, or is it truly to create a better product? And so I don't think we always have alignment in the why of engagement. And so then it creates, not as engaged processes as maybe would be needed to create what we want to create in our communities.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And there's a reason for that. It's because of all of these years of distrust between planners and what we've done to cities and communities. So I can give an example. We've been working in the Hidden Valley neighborhood after they put their light rail station in, trying to convince people or get their opinions on how the light rail was changing their community. And a lot of them said, well, this isn't really what we needed. Nobody really asked, what do we need here, right? If you really want to talk to our problem, get rid of this hotel that's falling down on the corner, right? That's our problem. This train's not for us. This train is for the newcomers to the city. I can only go one place, right? It's not taking me to any jobs. So again, going back to Liz's point, it's not the community engagement part was there, but it's more like, here, we're giving you this train. Isn't this wonderful? So there's this long history of distrust and not really listening to what the community wants. It's more pushing the agenda.
So thanks for that, Elizabeth. And I wanted to follow up on Liz's point too about conflict and tension. And there are many issues that create tension in the housing context. One that's come up recently, earlier this month, implementation of Charlotte's 2040 comprehensive plan, which Willie mentioned earlier, was delayed as concerns were raised about some of its provisions, including one that would encourage duplexes and triplexes in areas currently limited to single-family houses. And as the Charlotte Observer reported, some city council members associated such zoning with segregation and racism, while others believe single-family neighborhoods are part of the American tradition, regardless of race. And as one letter to the editor stated, back in 1988, when we came to check out moving to Charlotte, we loved the character of Myers Park, Dilworth, Wendover, et cetera. We weren't going to buy there as our budget couldn't afford it, but we felt that Charlotte was preserving the character of its history by keeping these neighborhoods. Single family housing is part of the American dream and you would destroy it. This is not a solution to affordable housing. So how would you suggest we think about this issue and the apparent tensions between creating more affordable housing and preserving the character of neighborhoods that at least some Charlotte residents very much value?
I hate to keep going first. John's the academic here. I think you reach this place where part of your problem is, and I have lots of friends who are in the real estate industry. I was in it for a really long time. And this is not disparaging, but they know how to sell what they sold. Okay, they know the process, they know the marketing, they know the vocabulary.
Willie, I think your audio cut out. But you're not muted. So. Okay, yeah. Eugene, I saw you unmuted before Willie started. Do you want to go?
Sure. This is a close and dear subject to me, so I have some passion behind this. I think first we got to be honest, and with the folks that are kind of the naysayers of this, is what we're talking about is property values. When you talk about the tradition of single family homes, we traditionally, that is people's wealth. Most Americans' wealth is in their home. And so the single family provided a safe place to essentially invest your money. And when you kind of start to push against that and you talk about duplexes and triplexes being next to single family homes, people are going to have a certain reaction to it. And so I think we have to be honest about that conversation, but also educate people that it doesn't mean that you're going to lose value being next to a duplex. I think that's a hard kind of curve for people to get around, but I think it's essential for people to truly understand that your property values will be protected. If you're talking about duplex and triplex, and again, we have plenty of examples across the country. In this very city, you see this in Dilworth, Myers Park. You will have a single family home right next to a quadruplex, and it works for everyone. And so I think you really have to be strategic of kind of how you do this. But I think you have to first start to be honest about what we really are talking about and people's values and what that actually means for them personally.
Thank you, Eugene. And I also, Willie mentioned that John is an academic, so is Elizabeth. And I'd like to invite both of you in. And then maybe Liz, you can round us out at the end because we do need to move to our deliberative component for all of our participants. So maybe Elizabeth, then John, and then Liz for our final word.
Yeah, sure. Well, so the American dream, this idea that anyone can be a home builder, I mean, a homeowner, if we're going to be honest, it was not a dream that was open for most people throughout the history of our country, right? This was something that was available only to white and wealthier residents. You know, the housing discrimination was something that was legal until 1968. And so before 1968, if you were not white, you could not own a home and you could not accrue that wealth and you could not pass that on to your children. And so we built this really unequal system. And if we want to make things less unequal, we need to do things differently. So by preserving the character of our neighborhoods, we're preserving this intense and entrenched segregation and racially discriminatory housing practices. So we have to change, and it's scary. But if we're going to, go on a different path, we have to kind of confront that fear and realize that we need to do things differently.
And I agree. And the issue that Willie brought up earlier, that, what do you do about the single family neighborhoods and preserving the character versus the need for more housing? I mean, that's really the issue. When we strip everything else away, it's the character of not changing my neighborhood versus the need for more housing and more supply in a limited environment. I mean, there's not going to be any more land within Mecklenburg County. That's a set. So what ways can we get about it? We can have more by right development, permissionless zoning. This is something that the Obama administration talked about in 2016 with by right development, so that if you're the property owner, then you can make changes to your property by right. Allow more mixed development. You can convert abandoned shopping centers that were zoned commercial but have lost their usefulness or utility to and convert those to housing. Make zoning approvals without a vote if they comply with the existing zoning codes. One-stop shop permitting. They're allowing smaller lots sizes. There are lots and lots of different ways of thinking outside the box. And we have been boxed in with doing things the old ways. But I mean, this panel is just a vastly diverse group of people, and we all see the same problem, and we all have good ways of going about solving it. And I think that's really neat. And so I'm just really pleased to be here with y'all. So thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Just one last piece. Something that keeps getting missed in the debate around single family housing is that the consumer, each decade, the consumer and consumer preferences begin to change. And so I think part of holding on to this single family relic in stuff that I'm doing, people who are 33 don't want to sitting more. They don't want to sit on Saturday. They don't want to be on a lawnmower cleaning, cutting grass and so forth. So I think we're at a place where we can experiment with density, but I would tack on to the end of John's point. It's the single family houses, but it's also in contradiction to density, because you can't have, you can't continue to grow with Mother Earth, God's creation. It didn't give you but so much. And so if more people are there, then more of you got to fit in less space. And you got to work it out.
Thanks, Willie. And for the last word, Liz?
Yeah. So I'll just say, the single family home, one, I would totally agree, density has to be part of the conversation around housing. And so we have to look for tools that allow us to lean into density. I would also say this notion of single family homes being part of the quote unquote American dream, that's a constructed dream. We can look to American history for times when we lived in far more integrated and far more dense housing patterns. And we need to look that way, and we need to recognize when this ideal was constructed and the why behind it.
Okay, thanks for that, Liz. And thank you all for a really stimulating conversation. And thank you, Katie, for directing traffic and helping us stay on target. So now everyone else is going to have a chance to share your own insights and listen to one another's perspectives on these complex and important issues. And in a moment, we're going to send you to breakout rooms with one of our certified DCI facilitators. These facilitators, and Katie is one of them, have completed an intensive training program hosted by the DCI, and they will guide you through a deliberative process that we hope will enable you to learn from and engage with one another. They'll follow the deliberation guide that we posted on the Eventbrite page and sent to you all in our reminders about the event. And I think we're going to post the link again in case you don't have it in the chat. And just one note to highlight from the guide related to our expected outcomes from these discussions. Given the complexity of this topic and our limited available time, we don't expect all of you to come to any formal agreement or declarations about housing in the region. Instead, our focus is on deepening our knowledge of different perspectives about the needs, goals, and solutions for challenges related to housing in our communities. Facilitators will take notes throughout this deliberation. And after the event, the DCI will share an event summary highlighting key themes, new ideas, and both areas of agreement and disagreement that are identified during your small group discussions. And we recognize there are a lot of great organizations working on some important housing initiatives on housing in the region. And our hope is that this event and these conversations complement those efforts. And also, please remember that all of us here tonight are here as individuals with a wide range of ties and identities. And while we may work for particular organizations or come from a particular community, we may not necessarily be here in a capacity to represent those organizations or communities. So instead, we find it most useful to think of ourselves here as individuals in all of our complexity, to learn and share our personal perspectives and lived experiences with one another. And our panelists are going to be available to drop in to answer any key questions relevant to their particular expertise that come up during your conversation. Your facilitator will just send a quick note to me, and the relevant panelists will come in and address your question. But they won't stay long because we want this part of the event to be about you all engaging with one another on this important topic. So, okay, so here we go, but one last tip. So if you're able and willing, we encourage you now to turn on your video so that your group can see you. It makes the Zoom group experience a little more like an in-person conversation and enables you all to see who you're talking to. So with that, you should now be invited to join a breakout room. Just click OK and enjoy your conversations. And we'll come back here at the end to summarize and wrap things up. Thanks. Hello, welcome back everyone. So it looks like everyone's coming back in and it's great to see you. I had the pleasure of dropping in with all of you and seeing and hearing and kind of a fly on the wall, conversations that were ongoing. And it seemed like you all were really engaging the topic and the complexity. And that was fantastic to see and really engaging with one another. So, and I know it's maybe kind of for some of the groups, like abrupt ending, right? You may have been just in the midst of some really important thoughts and comments, and so we apologize for that. But we also want to respect all of your time. It's getting late, and just want to note that this, hope you all see this as the beginning and not the end of these kind of conversations. So I have a couple comments, before we let you all go. So three things in particular. So first, recognizing that while we believe deliberation is a necessary component of what we call kind of democratic citizenship, we also recognize it is not sufficient to sustain the promise of what we also might think of as a healthy democracy. And so we really also have to engage in other forms of citizenship, which include learning more and connecting with others and taking action. And so after every DCI event, we distribute a document called Beyond the Deliberation that lists a series of action pathways for participants to consider. And for today's event, they include connecting with any of the organizations represented on our panel today and a host of other great organizations, including the Davidson Housing Coalition. I'm happy to say that the new executive director has been with us tonight, and that's been fantastic. Also Habitat for Humanity, the North Carolina Housing Coalition, and more. Engaging in these pathways is completely up to you. You can choose to follow any of them or none, but we encourage you to at least consider them as options that can build on the conversation you just had with your fellow deliberative citizens. And more generally, if you enjoyed tonight's event, we encourage you to sign up for updates from the DCI about similar opportunities in the future. In addition to the forums like tonight's event, we also host deliberative skill builder and bridge builder D teams that meet with a facilitator to discuss a different topic each month. And you get to know each other, your members of your team, and we'll be distributing signups for those for the fall soon. And you can learn more from our website at the link that Claire's gonna post into the chat. And to learn more about the great work of our two co-hosts, the Center for Civic Engagement and the North Mecklenburg Economic Mobility Collaborative, please also check out their websites as well. And Claire's gonna share their links too. And finally, I would like to thank our amazing panel for joining us this evening, and all of our facilitators for serving as moderators of all of your conversations together. And last but not least, I want to thank all of you for participating in tonight's event. Your willingness to engage with one another on these challenging issues should give us hope for both our democracy and our future. And so we'll hang out for a few minutes if anyone wants to follow up with us. But in the interest of time and everyone's sleep, our forum is now adjourned. So thank you again for being here.